Too bad. It would have looked a lot better for the church if the change had come sooner. Answer: maybe, but not necessarily. During the 1960s, the church was under a great deal of pressure over its racial restrictions from various national organizations and leaders. Indeed, I recall that period as a public relations nightmare for the church. Yet, if the church had made the policy change then, the public relations outcome might have been anticlimactic, since the church would have appeared to be caving in to political expediency rather than maintaining its own prophetic and procedural integrity, even in the face of public criticism. Well, anyway, now the church has dropped its earlier racist ideas and policies. Is it attracting many black members? Answer: conversions in Africa are really quite startling. But of course, racial conflict in the U.S. has never been especially salient to Africans. The growth of the church among African Americans, however, has been much slower, largely because of the lingering racist heritage of the past and the seeming inability of the church to deal with this heritage candidly. Those black members and investigators who find it hard to look past all of that have also found it hard to remain active in the church. We have a lot yet to do. Well, that's the end of my hypothetical apologia. I recommend something like this approach in our future efforts to confront our racist past and to place that past in an understandable historical context. It unshackles us from the accumulated racist folklore of the 19th century, on which we have so far depended to explain, quote unquote, the traditional discriminatory policies in the church. It is candid and faithful to the historical record as we have it so far. It acknowledges the human element in church leadership, but it ultimately vindicates the process of divine revelation. It is an explanation likely to be understood by many black Americans of goodwill who have been put off by so much that they've heard before from and about the Mormons. Whatever we do, though, we must abandon the old explanations based on 19th century interpretations of Scripture. These only make it harder for us to reach black Americans. I am aware that the official explanation offered these days for denying the priesthood of blacks is that we don't know. That response to questions about the past is perhaps technically accurate, since very few members or leaders know much about the history of our black members or of their part in our larger history. It is true also that we can't be sure of all that lay behind Brigham Young's 1852 declaration that the descendants of Cain could not have the priesthood. In the absence of all such knowledge, certainly the safest thing for a church member or leader to say today is that we don't know. It is also a good public relations tactic, since it has the effect of changing the subject before it gets complicated. Yet, it is also somewhat disingenuous to say that we don't know. And it is certainly an unsatisfactory response to any of our converts, investigators, or youth who are conscientiously troubled by this chapter in our history, especially if they're black. The fact is that we do have a lot more relevant historical knowledge than would be indicated by the "we don't know" response. This knowledge, furthermore, is based on authoritative historical research by responsible scholars, to which I have alluded in the hypothetical conversation that I just summarized. Although this historical literature cannot tell us anything about the mind of God, or about revelatory encounters of our leaders with deity, it can tell us a great deal about the evolving historical contexts within which racial conceptions developed across time, both in the nation and in the church. Understanding these contexts, in turn, will help us to understand the ideas and policies of church leaders, especially where influences upon them from those contexts can be inferred or even demonstrated. Obviously, divine guidance does not depend upon historical context, but it seems clear from history that some revelations have been received, at least some revelations have been received, by prophets in response to inquiries motivated by the surrounding social and political environment. What I have presented here draws upon such an historical context. But for obvious reasons, I have not broadened that context beyond what seemed necessary for a discussion of the ideas and policies of the Latter-day Saints regarding black people. There is, however, a still larger context, and that is the origin and development of LDS conceptions about race and lineage more generally. And here I conclude with a shameless plug for my new book. My recent book, All Abraham's Children, undertakes to explain our changing views about blacks within the still larger context of changing views about Jews, about Lamanites, and indeed about American Mormons as Anglo-Ephraimites. Our understandings about all such lineages, and others too, have evolved in response to our experiences with the world's peoples encountered in our global missionary enterprise. And that is the end of my message to you today. We have a little time, I guess.